The next speaker to join us today is Dr. Sudha Murthy from India. Dr. Murthy has over 20 years of experience as Chief of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine at the Indo-American Cancer Hospital and Research Institute in Hyderabad, in India, a premier tertiary cancer care hospital and advisor to many diagnostic labs trying to set up molecular assays and other cancer diagnostic testing. Dr. Murthy is keen on leveraging the potential of next-generation sequencing by bringing down the cost and making it accessible to cancer patients irrespective of their socioeconomic status, and hopes to work with NGOs and policymakers to make this a reality. For a complete biography on Dr. Sudha Murthy, please visit the tab at the top of your screen. Today, she will be sharing with us her experiences on the transition from sequential testing to multi-gene panel testing in their center and their operational strategies in molecular profiling of lung cancer. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Murthy.
Good morning. In the realm of personalized medicine, lung cancer biomarker testing has undergone a paradigm shift from assessment of single gene testing to comprehensive genomic profiling. Treatment guidelines from National Cancer Comprehensive Network, the NCCN, and ESMO, European Society for Medical Oncology, now recommends a wide panel NGS to approach molecular profiling of lung cancers. Non-small cell lung cancer management encompasses the morphologic and molecular characterization of the tumor, determine predictors of response to therapy, prognosticate the disease, and awareness of targeted therapies based on specifications. As we go down the algorithm of NSCLC diagnosis, it is important to identify whether a given lung cancer is primary or metastatic. If it is a primary, whether this is a small cell lung cancer or a non-small cell lung cancer. If it is a non-small cell lung cancer, whether it is a squamous or a non-squamous, de facto it is an adenocarcinoma unless otherwise specified. And then the downstream molecular pathways, including PD-L1 IHC testing for immunotherapy. So the recent NCCN guidelines recommend whole molecular profiling of non-small cell lung cancers, especially adenocarcinoma in its advanced stages, large cell carcinomas, and NSCLC not otherwise specified. And a whole host of markers have been recommended in addition to PD-L1 testing. Whereas when it's squamous cell carcinoma, it is recommended that EGFR mutation and ALK testing should be done in never smokers or small biopsy specimens where there is a chance of missing out a component of adenocarcinoma or mixed histology, in addition to the most important PD-L1 testing. Also important are the tumor mutation burden. If it's a known case of lung cancer, whether there is any transformation to small cell lung cancer, MET amplification and HER2 alterations have entered the clinical trial scenario and are potential inclusions in future. Now, a pathologist is encountered oftentimes with a very tiny fragment of tissue, and she or he has to render the morphology, do the appropriate subtyping if necessary, doing immunohistochemistry very judiciously, and of course do PD-L1 and a whole host of molecular markers or the biomarkers. The tissue issue has always been there. To understand that, nearly 70% patients present at advanced stage with unresectable tumors. 70% of lung cancers are diagnosed on small biopsies and cytology specimen, and 70% of small samples may represent the only tissue from the patient. The whole workflow of diagnosis of lung cancer has multiple steps, multiple processes, multiple personnel, and multiple technologies. So it could be a tissue which comes from a resection or a small biopsy, which is further processed into an FFP block, which is submitted for nucleic acid extraction. It could be cytology material, which could be either a fine needle aspiration cytology or fluids, that is exfoliative cytology. So the preferred sample is a cell block, but even the FNAC smears can be submitted for NGS. And of course, when it comes to liquid biopsies, it is blood, that is the plasma or cyst fluid. And the key personnel who are involved in this whole workflow are the surgeons, pulmonologists, pathologists, radiologists, molecular biologists, bioinformaticians, patients. So many stakeholders in the whole process, and therefore there needs to be a continuous communication. The sample collection depends on the type of testing, whether it is somatic, which is done on formalin-fixed paraffin-embedded blocks, or germline testing, that is on an EDTA sample, and if it's liquid biopsy, in preservative tubes called the Streck tubes, wherein cell-free DNA or cell-free RNA are obtained. So today we will be dealing only with somatic testing in my talk, and therefore the factors affecting quality of NGS results from FFPE tissue would be discussed. So the factors are sample age, fixation and processing protocols, and of course the storage methods. So again, to reiterate, the type of samples that come to the lab are small biopsies, section specimens. These could be pneumonectomies or lobectomies or even wedge resections of lung, FNAC smears and cytospin material, which are particularly preferred, especially in RNA testing because of intact nuclei, and endoscopic bronchial ultrasound guided cytology material. Fluids could be pleural fluid or ascitic fluid, cerebrospinal fluid, and plasma in cases of liquid biopsy. So in our lab, when we realized that the lung molecular assays are becoming more and more complex, we resorted to tissue-based customization, which was done using color-coded cassettes. So we embed these tissues, the precious lung tissues, in blue cassettes, so that the technician who is handling would understand this is lung and therefore do a surface embedding so that not much of trimming is needed, and also serial sections are not taken to conserve tissue for molecular processing. So lean principles have been employed for this very important aspect of lung cancer. So this is how we take two blocks. These are color-coded cassettes, and each block has equally distributed tissue. The formalin fixation, as we all know, forms DNA cross-linkages, and it affects the downstream molecular results. And therefore, it is important to look at few aspects. One is the delay to fixation. So that means that the time that has elapsed between the tumor coming out of the body and the time when it's put in formalin. So that's the formalin time, which needs to be recorded on the requisition. The time in formalin, that is the time when it has been put in the formalin and then when it's taken for processing, which should not exceed, which is the recommended guidelines are 6 to 72 hours. And the pH of the formalin. Since we have in our hospital, the formalin is supplied by the labs, we have standardization there. So it is 10% neutral buffered formalin which is utilized. The factors, of course, are the processing methods, the processor fluid maintenance, the paraffin wax temperature, and fixation time, as I just alluded to. Formaldehyde, as we all know, induces cross-links. This causes DNA fragmentation and deamination of cytosine bases and generation of abasic sites. So this aspect of fixation is very important. It is also recommended, especially in the tropical countries, to store these FFP blocks at low temperatures, like 4 degrees centigrade. So in addition, the pathologist has to, at the time of reporting, map the area of interest in a given sample, identify and exclude areas of necrosis or inflammation, make a note of the percentage viable tumor for each slide, and select the slide for further workup, whether which slide can be taken up for immunohistochemistry or molecular. And then the other factor which is very important is the quality of paraffin wax. So we have reverted to the pellet form of the wax, which has lesser impurities and therefore gives better results for molecular evaluation. The tumor enrichment is another important aspect that needs to be taken care by the pathologist. It can be done either by microdissection or microdissection using laser capture microdissection. Now, macrodissection, when the sections are cut, especially if it's a larger tissue, the pathologist would mark the viable tumor. An unstained section is cut, superimposed over the stained slide, the area harboring the viable tumor is identified, and that particular tissue is taken into an Eppendorf and then processed for downstream extraction. As far as laser capture microdissection is concerned, it is not available in all the labs because of the cost involved and that being labor intensive, and we also do not have the LCM. The other methods that are used are boring, coring, gouging material from the tumor blocks, especially for the microarrays. Now, coming to cytology, this has been proven to be a very important material for NGS testing. So the FNAC this is done in either the radiology suite or in the operation theater. And a technique called ROSE is employed, which is nothing but a rapid on-site evaluation, wherein the rapid stain is done and the pathologist would look for adequacy of tumor cells, and if found adequate, then a dedicated pass for molecular biology testing is done and samples are procured for either liquid-based cytology, cell blocks, or direct smears. And then if the order has not been made upfront, if it comes, the test request comes in an archival sample, the cytopathologist has to review the report, select the best quality archived material. It could be smears, which need to be unstained and processed thereafter, or it could be cell blocks, determine the cellularity and purity as if it is for a FFPE block, and then process the sample. So it could be either in-house molecular testing or outsourced molecular pathology testing, but this aspect and role by the pathologist is very important. So a molecular pathologist with acumen in anatomic pathology and cytology is of great help in optimizing tissue triage and guiding nucleic acid extraction for optimal yield in downstream processes. The pathologist plays a role in liaising between the oncologists and scientists to order the most appropriate panels, and also corroborates the results with morphology, clinical findings, and NGS outputs. So these are the garden varieties, the subtypes of non-small cell lung cancer, the commoner adenocarcinoma, which is typified by TTF1 positivity, squamous cell carcinoma, which is identified by P40 nuclear positivity. Oftentimes, we encounter poorly differentiated carcinomas wherein you cannot see a differentiation of either adenocarcinoma or squamous carcinoma. And these are dubbed as NSCLC, NOS. But the other alert is that we need to be aware of non-carcinomatous tumors as well, like mesotheliomas and sarcomas, though rare, they also need to be taken care. So we understand that single gene testing can be done by IHC and RT-PCR and FISH, but why NGS? NGS has come into vogue because it helps us identify multiple targets in multiple genes in multiple patients simultaneously, and therefore tissue optimization, cost efficiency, turnaround time are the biggest advantages. NGS helps us do a simultaneous analysis of multiple genetic aberrations, which include single nucleotide variants, insertions or deletions or the indels, CNVs, and complex genomic rearrangements. So the commonest panels that are done in a clinical diagnostic lab is targeted panel. But before understanding what are the targeted panels for detection of actionable molecular targets in NSCLC, we need to understand few basic terms. One, the depth of sequencing. The depth of sequencing is the number of times a specific base has been sequenced and aligned to the reference genome. The exon coverage is the percentage of exons that are spanned by at least one sequencing read, and VAF, or the variant allele frequency, is the percentage of variant reads in a background of normal reads. So the targeted panels have a high depth as well as high overall exon coverage, generally to the tune of more than 99%, and therefore they are most preferred. These are cost effective with rapid turnaround time in the clinical settings. But on the flip side, these cannot detect chromosomal CNVs and complex genomic rearrangements, wherein we need to go for whole exome or whole genome sequencing. So in our lab, we have used FFPE DNA has been isolated using DNA-easy blood and tissue kit from QIAGEN and quantified using qubit HSDNA kit. RNA was isolated using Recoverall total nucleic acid isolation kit and quantified using TapeStation, which is a recent entrant, or qubit. And template preparation was done using IonChef. Sequencing was done on the Ion S5 platform, and data analysis was done on Torrent Suite software and Ion Reporter. Wherever needed, the drug information was obtained from OKR. The panels that were used were AMPLISEQ colon and lung cancer panels, which were both mutations and fusions consisting of 26 genes. And it's very important that a multidisciplinary communication is maintained to optimize specimen acquisition, processing, and interpretation. To leverage the potential of technology, that is the NGS, you need specialized expertise in the form of oncologists, trained pathologists, molecular biologists, and trained technologists. A well-processed tissue, morphologic expertise, troubleshooting and prioritizing for downstream assays, validation, and planning work optimally for making it financially sustainable. And of course, the most important IT solutions, the servers, bioinformaticians, or if not available, softwares for analysis. These are the important components of NGS. The different steps: nucleic acid extraction followed by library generation, DNA fragmentation, ligation of adapters, amplification and sample enrichment, thereafter template generation and sequencing. So based on the type of sequencing targeted, whole genome, whole exome, and then the data analysis, which includes quality evaluation, alignment to reference genome, and the variant calling. So these are the different steps. The bioinformatics pipelines consist of primary analysis, which includes quality control filtering, secondary analysis, alignment to reference genome, SAM-BAM processing, coverage analysis or variant calling, and the tertiary analysis, annotation, classification, and biomarker analysis before a report which is clinically relevant is generated. So moving on to single genes, a word about each of these. EGFR, the epidermal growth factor receptor, tyrosine kinase. The identification of sensitizing mutations in EGFR help determine targeted therapy. So exon 19 deletions and L858R point mutations in exon 21 are commonest. Rarer mutations in exon 18 to 21 are also seen, and resistance to therapy, there are some mutations which are important in this setting. So the NCCN guidelines again recommends osimertinib as a first-line therapy, the others being erlotinib, afatinib, gefitinib, and decomitinib. So ALK is a receptor tyrosine kinase. Generally, it's a fusion between EML4 ALK, and it results in dysregulation and inappropriate signaling through the ALK kinase domain. It is tested either by IHC, the ALK D53 clone, or FISH for EML4 ALK. The global data suggests that 3 to 5% positivity is seen in lung cancers. However, in Indian scenario, it is much higher. And in our study, which was published in 2017, it was 15.5%, which was similar to a study published by researchers from Tata Memorial Hospital. ROS1, encoded by the C-ROS oncogene, is a receptor tyrosine kinase, a cell surface receptor which is involved in cell growth. The fusion partners are CD74, CCDC6, and FIG. And these fusion partners can be detected only by NGS, though at this point in time, FISH is supposed to be the gold standard, and there is an IHC for screening as well. So in our data, it was 2% positivity in our cohort. KRAS is not done as a routine, though, in single gene. It is seen at codon 12. It is poor prognostic factor. It helps exclude other genes because it is generally mutually exclusive. There is reduced responsiveness to EGFR TKI therapy. And of course, the nucleid in the block, the NTRK, so the neurotropin tyrosine kinase receptor that are rarely rearranged in non-small cell lung cancers as well. These are detected by NGS, and that is the preferred method because it detects fusions. IHC, there is a surrogate in IHC and FISH as well. BRAF is again being included because there are targeted therapies for this as well. Just to cite a study by the MSKCC Impact study in 2017, which showed that EGFR frequency is seen to the tune of 25.9% as opposed to ALK, which is only 3.6%, ROS1 2.8%, and BRAF 2%. So a similar study in our setting, which was presented at the AMP Global last year, a cohort of 647 patients, we had seen 52% mutant, EGFR mutant patients, and which was much higher than what has been reported globally. And this is the scenario in the Asian studies. Of these, the commonest was deletion 19, followed by L858R point mutation. So this is a summary of all the three biomarkers: EGFR 52.5, ALK 15.5 positivity, and ROS 2%. So what was interesting to note in our cohort was that the actionable mutations, especially ALK and ROS, the rearrangements, were seen more commonly in the less than 42 years age group patients as compared to those who were more than 40 years, and this was statistically significant. At disease progression, T790M mutation was done on tissue biopsies predominantly in our study, and this was 83%, and the cell-free DNA was only in 17%, which was of course outsourced, and we had seen 52.9% positivity, which was published in the IJMPO. That was similar to a study from Rajiv Gandhi Cancer Hospital. Now, the preliminary experience that we had with NGS, please note that there is a selection bias and does not represent the actual percentages. It is not continuous sampling, as the test was performed based on several factors, including affordability, availability of representative tumor tissue, and urgency of the test results. So selectively, NGS was performed in few patients after appropriate validations. And in this, we had seen that in a cohort of 151 patients, 20% exhibited EGFR mutation, and TP53 mutation was noted in 24%, PIK3C in a small proportion, 6%, and KRAS in 9%. All the others were seen in small numbers. Fusions were done for various reasons: inadequacy of tissue, blocks being obtained from outside. So we could not perform on the NGS because RNA needs lots of more tissue as compared to FISH or IHC that was done in these cases. Only 29 blocks were submitted for fusion studies, of which 5 were EML for ALK, CD74 ROS1 in 2, MET, RET in 1 each, and ROS1 with other fusion partners in 1. No fusions were seen in 19. This is too small a number to derive percentages, but these are the rough percentages. So the key to successful NGS integration with clinical practice, especially in precision oncology, are the stakeholders: the clinical oncologists, the pathologists, the cancer researchers, computational biologists, bioinformaticians, and most important, the patients. So to conclude, next-gen sequencing is a very useful complementary tool in the management of lung cancers and is here to stay. It may not replace single gene testing totally in the real-world scenario at this point in time, as several technical and operational challenges still remain. It is cost-effective and comprehensive technique with a rapid turnaround time if tissue is not an issue, and in centers with substantial workload. And a multidisciplinary team comprising of pathologists, oncologists, molecular biologists, bioinformaticians in close coordination are vital to the success of a precision oncology program. I acknowledge the support of all my clinical colleagues and my scientific colleagues and staff and doctors at Indo-American Cancer Hospital. Thank you for a patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Murthy, for that extremely engaging presentation. We will now move into the live Q&A portion of the presentation. And as a reminder, please submit your questions via the Q&A box. There are several questions coming through, so I'll jump straight to the first one. Since more than 70% of non-small cell lung cancer patients are diagnosed at an advanced stage, do you feel that the personalized approach to NSCLC treatment is important to maximize the effectiveness of currently available therapies?
It is absolutely true that a personalized approach needs to be taken for the NSCLC management, and the new NCCN guidelines also recommend molecular profiling, including the actionable targets, and therefore NGS is preferred over single gene testing, and so as to address the driver mutations and therefore, like my previous speaker had said, incorporating PD-L1 in the molecular profiling would really be the way forward. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Yeah, we have more questions. So to the next one. In your opinion, how important is it to explore the resistance mutations in addition to the driver mutations?
So this is upfront at diagnosis or following during the course of therapy? What is the?
I am assuming it's during the course of therapy. That's my assumption.
So, yeah. So I think it is very important to look at the resistance mutations because we have seen in our cohort about 50% of patients having resistance mutations during the course of therapy, and therefore it's very important. It's only that which technology needs to be used, and since NGS incorporates a larger panel, this is what is recommended at this point in time, although in India we see more of droplet digital PCR being utilized for this very important testing. And it is very important to monitor the course of disease, and for which we need to do resistance mutations. Thank you.
Thank you. How do you manage the rapidly emerging biomarkers and incorporating them into your panel when doing NGS?
I think at this point in time, NGS practice in the diagnostic lab in our country is yet to mature. But then, yes, the early starters, we have had some very good ready-made panels from our vendors, which has helped us approach the standard of care. But as and when there are new trials and requests from oncologists, we try to validate these against established known samples, and on an experimental or a trial basis, this can be done. But once it is established in clinical trials, probably validation is what is needed. But considering the cost involved in all these, we wait for the trials to establish before we start experimenting on this.
Yes, I think it can definitely be a long and expensive process.
Yeah.
Another question: how many percentage of sample types received in India are of cytology nature instead of FFPE? And what are the good practices to process these cytology samples for NGS?
Yeah, great. So this has a referral bias because the institute that I work for prefers biopsies over cytology. Nevertheless, there are situations when we have to take the cytology samples when biopsy is not feasible. So if you look at it in terms of percentages, probably we have a bias towards biopsies, but we do get substantial number, which would be around 15% of the total samples, which would be cytology. And most of these are cell blocks, unless otherwise specified. There has been a very rare occasion when we have tried, but these are under validation on the smears. We haven't really delivered a patient report on the smears. We have only resorted to cell blocks being submitted for NGS because, again, it is the quality and the cost which is involved, and it costs heavily for the patient. So we cannot throw the price on the patient. So that is the reason. A biopsy or a cell block is preferred. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think one last question. What is the percentage of failure rates of your samples for NGS?
It depends. So for the biopsies, we have had failure rates, especially from blocks that we have received from outside. We have no clue about the pre-analytic processes. And I would not talk about NGS in that sense. It is the single gene as well. We have had failure rates of 22%, which we have published from blocks that had been received from outside. However, in-house blocks where we have a control over the pre-analytic processes, the fixation, the processing, the failure rate is substantially lower, and that is where we say that pre-analytics are a very important component of somatic testing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think with that, we are at time. So I'd like to thank you once again to both our speakers for this session, Dr. Huang and Dr. Murthy, for their presentations, and to the audience for all your questions.
Thank you so much.
With that, we now conclude day one of the clinical oncology track. We hope you have found the presentations useful and impactful. The presentations from this entire event will be available on demand for viewing until June 2021. Please do share it with your colleagues who might be interested in the wide range of presentations shared over these 2 days. We will start the live webinar session tomorrow at 11 a.m. Singapore time with the SARS-CoV-2 research track, followed by a second clinical oncology track at 12:15 Singapore time. The activities and the exhibit hall will remain open for you after this. So please continue to visit our booths and talk to our Thermo Fisher colleagues who are waiting to help you find the right solutions to help accelerate your research. Please do not forget to check the leaderboard on the top right side of the screen to see what activities are available, including the scavenger hunt, and look out for our special icons in the environment to win prizes. There will be a pop-up survey appearing in a minute, so please do help us by completing that survey. On behalf of Thermo Fisher Scientific, we hope you enjoyed the event and look forward to your participation tomorrow. Thank you and stay safe.